Hey everybody, I'm Jason Mefford, and I am back with Brad Miller, and we are walking a spiritual path today. And today, like most of the episodes that we record, we don't really know what we're going to talk about and just rely on the intuition to come. And so I know some of you that, may listen to this, you're like, man, these guys are all over the place. Well,
True
we
story.
are, true story, but it's really because we're just recording and talking about the things that it feels like we're supposed to talk about. But there's always a tie-in to our spiritual journey on this earth. In fact, pretty much everything that you are doing, even though you think it's 3D, it has a spiritual connotation to it. So hopefully you're reading that into a lot of the episodes that we're doing today, or that we've done as well. So to start off with, we're gonna just let Brad kind of explain the inspiration behind today's episode. And so I'll just let him go with it because he's still like, I don't know what this means. But I think I do. So Brad, go ahead and
Good.
share what happened today.
Good. I'm glad one of us knows what's going on then. So most mornings I like to sit after I do some other things. I like to kind of sit, maybe in some silence, do maybe a little bit of meditation or something. This morning I decided that I was going to listen to a guided meditation. Um, I woke up earlier than normal today. Woke up with a cramp in my leg, and I couldn't get back to sleep at that point. So I'm like, well, heck with it. I'm just gonna get up. And so I was a little ahead of the game today. So I had some extra time. So I'm like, oh, I'll pop in a guided meditation because I've got some extra time to do that today. And this meditation was just kind of opening you up, and there was some binaural beats in the background going on with it as well. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about in there or ask was, what do we need to talk about today on this podcast? Um, I knew we were recording today and didn't know what needed to be talked about. Again, like Jason said, this is not something generally I plan in advance. It's usually day of. I kind of sit there and in silence, or maybe I'll go on a hike, or maybe sometimes I'm in the shower, and I'll just kind of say to myself, all right, what needs to come out today? What we talk about, and inevitably, a couple topics usually end up popping up. So today, when I did that, I sat down, was listening, and I said, something along the lines of, what do we need to talk about today on the podcast? And three words came out, and it was Jason means healer. And I'm like, what? What's that mean? And something said, he knows what that is. Jason means healer. And I'm kind of like sitting there, like in my head, scratching my head, kind of like I don't know, but um that led us to today's topic. Whatever it ends up meaning, I don't know. We're gonna find out though.
Yep, and Jason does know what that means.
I do.
So
I will say that I do know that your name literally translates to healer.
it does literally translate to that. Yeah. But
So
there's more to it as well. And I've shared some of this stuff before, but for whatever reason, we need to talk about it today on this episode as well. And so I probably start off by telling a little story. Okay.
sit back and
Is
listen to a
sit
tale.
back, sit right back and I'll tale of a fateful trip. Go inside. Anyway, that's a great show. But so yeah, so I know there's a lot of people in the world who maybe don't like their name. Some people choose to go by a nickname or maybe a shortening of the name that they were given at birth because they don't like it. I've always liked my name but I was a bit annoyed when I was younger about my name, and I'll explain why later too. Okay. And so, the story goes like this. And again, I was too young to actually remember this, but this is kind of how it was recounted to me. Is there's 11 years between me and my next oldest sibling, right? I was one of those not accident babies, but I needed to be born at a certain time. And that's all I'm going to share about that for now. And so there's 11 years between me and my next sibling. And it wasn't that my parents were not trying to have kids. The doctor just told my mom, you're not going to have any more kids, right? There's some whatever with your body, you're done having kids. And so they went 11 years without having children. And all of a sudden, my mom gets the flu, what she thinks is the flu, only it doesn't go away. And she goes back in to the same doctor who told her that she would never have any kids again. And he starts laughing and he says, you're pregnant. And she says, what do you mean I'm pregnant? You told me I couldn't get pregnant. He's like, well, you're
My bad,
pregnant.
Joe.
My bad, my bad. You're pregnant, right? So here I am. I come along 11 years later, right? And like I said, there's a reason for that. But so, here I was kind of an unexpected, we'll say, from my parents' perspective, child. And so, things progressed. I was born, and again, there were some interesting things around that too, but that's not the topic of today's podcast. But one thing that did happen is, I was born and my parents didn't know what to name me. And so usually, when you have a child, parents usually know what the name is for the child. They tell it, they put it on the birth record and everything right there before you even leave the hospital or wherever you happen to be at. But my parents didn't know what to call me. And so they left the hospital and I didn't have a name at the hospital. Again, a little different. Come home and I think my parents kind of forgot about it a little bit. I don't know what they called me the first month of my life. Okay. Because I didn't quote unquote have a name for the government, right? And so, eventually the hospital called my parents and they're like, look, I think it was like a month. They're like, we have to submit this paperwork to the state. We need you to give us a name because if you don't give us a name, we have to put in on the birth certificate like no name, baby Mefford. Would have been what was on my birth certificate.
That'd be a
Okay,
totally different podcast episode if that's what we were
totally
talking
different,
about
but yeah,
today.
no name, baby Mefford. So, and again, I think my dad was the one that was on the phone, and I don't know if he had consulted my mom or if he just did it, but I kind of get the sense that it was just something that came out on the phone where it's like, well, why don't you call him Jason Lee? Yeah, that sounds good. Jason Lee. And so they put that on my birth certificate. And again, I don't think he consulted my mom, but it was just something again that came to him, and he's like, "Oh, that kind of sounds nice. I don't know anybody named Jason. That's probably a good name." He'd never, heard it. It wasn't a common name for boys. And so that's how I got the Jason Lee, and then obviously my family name Mefford as my name. That's kind of the story behind it. Now, growing up, again, my dad didn't know anybody named Jason, but guess what? For my age of boys, that was one of the most common names given to boys of my age within a few years range. It was very popular for a few years and then kind of went away. And so I remember, things like I was in first grade and we had three Jasons in our class. And we didn't just have three Jasons, we had two Jasons with the last name that started with M. So I couldn't even be Jason M. I had to be Jason Mefford. So as 6-year-old
Yeah.
kid, I had to write my whole name on all of my assignments, and that
You're
used to
telling my story
annoy
here.
me. You know this
This is
too,
my
right?
story because there was three Brads in my kindergarten class. And there was Brad, I don't know, but one of them was something, whatever. But two of us had M as our last initial. Because he had the longer last name, which is hard to spell, I ended up having to be for my full name. He just got to be Brad M, and the other one was just
Ah,
Brad. So the
int
same exact thing happened with me in kindergarten, and
interesting synchronicity.
the same thing with my daughter with her name is we thought, oh, no one has the same name as she does. Like it's a fun, it's a kind of an older name, like whatever. Yeah, there's like two on her soccer. There's another one on her soccer team. There was another one out on the other soccer team last night. The coaches were yelling their name. Like it's all over the place. And we are like, we didn't know anyone with this name. And now like everyone's got the same name. So yeah,
Okay,
telling
well
my
there you go.
story.
It was the same thing for me, right? So growing up, there were always other Jasons, and so like I said, I was kind of annoyed at first because I wanted to be, special. I didn't want to have to
Mhm.
write out my whole name as a first grader. That's a pain, just like for you as kindergartner.
Yeah.
But I never didn't like my name, right?
Mhm.
I was just always kind of uh there was kind of that annoyance that goes with it. And now,
Sure.
it's like it doesn't matter, at this point. But um so what's interesting is, again, as I've gone through and we've talked about here again, on the podcast about knowing yourself,
Hmm.
knowing yourself better. And from a spirituality standpoint, there's a lot that goes into a name. And so from a numerology perspective, as an example, the fact that my name is Jason, Jason, that ends up creating a specific numerology, right? And so it's something that is about me, even though, again, my parents didn't know why they were calling me Jason, but they called me Jason,
Hmm.
right? So as I have started to, dig into and get to know myself better, one of the questions that a lot of people always ask, and I still ask myself too, is what are my spiritual gifts? Right? Because some people are clairvoyant or clairaudient, or, there's different terms that go along with some of the more well-known spiritual gifts,
Sure.
for people
Speaking with
that can
uh
channel,
channeling, yep.
channeling, other
Dead
different things
people,
like that.
all that kind of things. Yep.
Speaking in tongues, I can't remember the exact name, but the glossolalia or something like that. But so for me, I always kind of felt like, well, do I have any of those things? Right. And I do. I actually have quite a few spiritual gifts. They're not ones that you might um, think about. And maybe we'll talk about some of those on another episode. But today we're talking about names, right? And getting to know yourself. And so, I don't even know how I found out. I've known for a while, 5, 10 years, something like that, that my name literally means healer, right? The name Jason, if you look it up on baby names, it means healer. And it's like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting, but I'm not a doctor or anything like that. But, well, that's kind of interesting. At first, it was kind of one of those things that's like interesting, right? And then as I have continued to know more about myself, learn more about myself, see what things I do, there's certain things that people tend to say about me, right? When they describe how I make them feel or other things like that. And we'll get to that in a minute. So Jason means healer. My middle name, Lee. It seems like, Lee seems like a, normal kind of thing. Well, it goes back to ties from Old English and other stuff, which often means a meadow or a clearing. But its real meaning is to provide shelter or protection. provide shelter or protection, right? And so, when you take those two together, a healer that provides shelter and protection sounds kind of cool, you know, to me at
Hmm.
least. But
Sure.
what does that actually mean? Well, when people describe some of the things about me or how they perceive me, um, there's something healing in my voice. There's something healing about being in my presence. That's one reason why I do a lot of videos, because I know that about myself. Practically, they're easier for me to do than trying to write. I can produce a lot more content, but I also know that there is something healing about my voice, whether I'm talking, whether I'm humming, whether I'm singing, whether I'm speaking in tongues. There is something healing and creative about my voice. Why? I don't know. I don't know. I just think I'm a normal guy, but there's something about it because too many people have told me this independently.
Hmm.
Another thing that people say all the time is you make me feel safe. Shelter, protection. So as I, again, kind of lean into that a little bit more, it's like this is one of the reasons why I do some of the things I do. This is why I record, I don't know, I've got 1,000+ videos on YouTube now, right? Of me talking and podcast episodes and everything else. And I don't know exactly how it works or what's actually going on, but I know
Hmm.
that's what's happening as I've started to learn more about myself. And again, you might think irony, coincidence. Oh, isn't that funny? Well, it is, but it wasn't just a coincidence that my dad got the inspiration to call me Jason Lee.
Hmm.
Now, another thing about my first name, J Son. In fact, one of my friends that sent me a note uh, wrote my name Jasun, J Sun. I'm a fire sign.
Hmm.
I'm a little sun. In German, ja means yes. Okay. Yes, sun. In Russian, ja means I. I, sun. Yes, sun. Not a coincidence either.
Hmm.
So, and then there's, of course, the whole story of Jason and the Argonauts and going after the Golden Fleece and all this other stuff, right? And that's an old name again, right? I mean, that goes clear
Hmm.
back to the Greek times. Where we might think of Jason as being kind of a modern name, but there's traces of it,
Hmm.
back in history as well. So, Jason means healer. What does that mean? Well, there's a little bit about what it means to me. And again, it's just my experience of understanding myself better, right? That we've talked about
Hmm.
on the podcast before. Know thyself. And sometimes there are clues in our names as to who we really are or what's really behind and what some of our gifts actually are.
Hmm. Interesting.
So, Brad Miller, right?
Hmm.
Bradley,
Hmm.
uh, middle name?
William.
William.
Hmm.
Bradley William. Hmm.
Yep.
So again, I don't know. Like I said, that's just my
Mm.
experience um, with the name and kind of, a little bit about why I'm doing some of the things that I do now. Because as I'm coming to know myself better and know what my strengths and gifts are, right? I'm leaning into those things and using or honing those crafts, that art of providing to the world, if you will. Um, so is that anything what
Yeah.
you thought that this was going to be about, Brad?
I have no, again, I did not know what this was going to be about, all outside the fact that I knew that your name literally meant healer. But beyond that, though, that's all that I was like, I don't know. Again, like I said, I didn't know where to go with this one. Just that is what kind of popped up to me, and so that's what.
Mhm. But I think it, again, I just shared some stories, but I think there's some very uh, practical lessons for all of us in this, right? At the beginning, again, it was like when we talked about monkey wrench. You got a couple of
Mhm.
words from the universe. You didn't know what they meant necessarily, but when you sat with it or you brought it to me, it's like, oh, I know what that means, right? In fact, a lot of times off camera, everybody, when Brad and I are talking, all of a sudden he'll say something or a phrase, and it's like, shit. Okay, yeah, Brad, thank you for channeling that for me. I needed to hear that, right? He didn't know what he was saying, but it meant something to me. And a lot of times that's what happens in our life. And you might not think that that's something spiritual, but it most definitely is spiritual. Okay. And I'll give you an example. You probably do this all the time. You just don't realize it, right? When things come in, and sometimes you're like, why did I just say that? Right? Sometimes things just come out. So I'll give you a real life example. My brother died when he was 13 and I was 15. Okay. Big traumatic experience in one's life, obviously, especially because of the nature of how he died. So while everyone in the house, obviously all the adults and friends and family and everybody coming over to console my parents, I just couldn't take it. I couldn't take all of these uh, crying, sad adults. I couldn't take that energy anymore. I was hiding out in the basement to try to get away from it. And finally, one of my friends called me because he's like, hey, I heard, why don't we go out? Let's go see a movie or something, get your mind off of things. And so we went out and saw a movie. And there were certain things that he told me. And actually, this comes in again. So, Jared, so we were driving in the car going to the movie, right? We go see the movie. I don't remember if it was to or from, but we probably had to drive like 10 miles to go to the closest theater because we lived a little ways outside of town. And so, the other part of the story I didn't tell you is I was born 11 years later. And my parents at that point decided, maybe we should kind of try to have another kid because we don't want this poor kid to grow up like an only child, right? And so my brother Jared was born 2 years after I was. And then he tragically died when he was 13. And again, at 15, here I am trying to process all this stuff. What does it actually mean? And actually, about a week before Jared died, he made a joke about eating cold pizza because he had to prepare for the mission that he was going to be taking. Odd, kind of coming
Mm.
out of a 13-year-old kid's name. Now, again, I grew up Mormon and we went on missions, but you didn't go until you were 19. He was 13.
Hmm.
And so to have him just say that out of the blue in the car with me and my mother was kind of interesting, and then a week or two later he's gone. And my friend, as we were driving, like I said, I don't remember if it was on the way to or back from the movie, but he made some comment about, Jared came so that you could have the experience of having a brother because you needed that experience. And when he had done what he needed to do, it was time to go back. Now, to this day, that friend denies ever saying that to me. He's like, no, I didn't do that. I didn't say that. I don't even know if he remembers us going to the movies, but it was something that channeled through him. That was something that I needed to hear for my healing. My healing.
Mhm.
Somebody else's voice can heal us as well, right? And so, again, as when things come through, that's part of the spirituality. It's intuition from the universe that's making you say something that is going to help somebody else around you, right? So there's a huge lesson in that. Again, and just like we've shared this a couple of times, we don't know what we're going to talk about when we get on here. We just rely on the intuition of what it feels like we're supposed to talk about, and then that's what we talk about,
Mhm.
right? That's spiritual, even though you think it's just, oh, I'm in my 3D body. Yeah, but you're not. It's not the same, right? And
Mhm.
so that's part of it as well, right? And the lesson of learning more about yourself, whether that's from your name, whether that's from numerology, whether it's from astrological signs, right? Because I'm a Leo. There's certain things about Leos, right? And especially different kinds of Leos. There's a Chinese zodiac. I'm a rat. Ugh, right? Everybody's like, oh, a rat. Ugh, right? No, there's I was in Chinatown in San Francisco, and I was looking for a statue of Lao Tzu that wrote the Tao Te Ching. And so I had to go to a lot of different stores, and finally I found one that they had one in the store. It was like a little miniatures, three of him together. And so I found it, and was talking to the woman who owned the shop and going back and forth. And she asked something, and it came out that I was a rat, right? Born in the year of the rat. And she stopped and she looked at me and she's like, "Oh, rat, very powerful medicine, big leaders." And I'm like, "Oh, right." So again, it's like here is this woman in this shop in Chinatown with her voice telling me something that I needed to hear, to learn, to heal from, right? Because most of us, we have this repulsion for rats. But I will tell you, rats are going to be around long after humans are because they're smart little people, I say people, beings, right?
Mhm.
So, but see, again, I don't know why I shared that story, but it popped into my head that I was supposed to share it.
Mm. Yeah. Don't know. Don't know. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
well, my name means broad.
Hmm.
And if you put the ly at the ley at the end is meadow. So a broad meadow.
Oh, interesting. A broad meadow.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Talking about your middle name. So I think they have the same origins.
Yeah, because even though Lee would be the same as an Ley, or I think in Old English it was Leigh. Lee is another way of spelling in Old English.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yes, a broad meadow. And then William is strong-willed warrior. So that one's interesting.
Hmm. Thus the will.
Hmm. Right. Obviously, William the Conqueror and all that stuff back in the,
Back in the day.
yeah.
Interesting. Right. And so again, it's, however, for everybody listening, it's like just start, maybe look up your name. Maybe it means something to you. Maybe it doesn't. Brad just did it while we were sitting here recording. I could see him over there typing. Right. Um, and I don't know what that necessarily means for Brad, but he has to figure it out.
Hmm.
Right. Just like I had to figure out for myself, and you have to figure out for yourself, everybody who's listening. Right. Because only
Hmm.
one can do. We have to do it ourselves. And whatever means you use, namology, numerology, astrology, other different ways, just start trying to learn more about yourself, right? Because you have gifts, you just don't realize it.
Hmm.
Or maybe you do realize it. Maybe you realize some of them, but you don't realize some other ones.
Sure.
And it's the same thing. It's like, some people, they that are, hearing voices, seeing across the dimensions, if you will, right? That's usually what we hear about.
The dead people. Yeah.
Yeah, talking to dead people, right? And those are gifts, and there's reasons for it. There's ways to use it for your benefit and for other people's benefits on this world, right? Other than it just being some stage show or some, what's the right word, I can't think of the right word, so it doesn't really matter, I guess. But some interesting thing, right? It's like, for what purpose? If you're going to talk to dead people, for what
Hmm.
purpose? Right? Because there's a
Right.
purpose. There are purposes for it.
Hmm.
And so, that's usually where we focus or think that's what it is. But what about somebody who actually speaks? And when you hear their voice, you feel at peace, you feel happy, you feel joy, right?
Hmm.
Isn't that a spiritual gift too? Right? And don't you like to be around people who maybe are doing that? Right? And again, there's other different things, right, that are around that I think are spiritual gifts that we don't necessarily think about because they're not listed as the 9 or 10 in the Bible, but there's lots of things that are out there.
Hmm.
And no one thing is any better than any other thing because they all have a purpose and they
Hmm.
all are one at the end of the day. So for all of you listening to audio, Brad's just sitting here nodding his head.
Sitting on my head. Yep. Like I said, I did not know from the beginning where this was going. So,
I didn't either. Like I said, I knew when we first started recording that I needed to tell the no name baby Mefford story and what the two words actually mean, but all the stuff in between
mhm,
and the other stories and the things that came out, I didn't know where we were going.
mhm,
But see, again, that's a lesson. It's like we just all have to trust it,
mhm.
trust, and just let it go through.
Allow. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, because we could have been going like, oh, well, we have to talk about this, this, and this. And if we don't talk about this, then the whole pot episode's a failure, or like this totally means that, like, none of that. Like, it's just whatever comes. Um, and sometimes it kind of goes where we think it's going to go. There's episodes where we're like, oh, I think it was
Sometimes
going to go
it
this
doesn't.
way. And the majority of the time it doesn't. We have an idea at the beginning and then we switch tracks several different times and we maybe somehow circle it all back up together usually at the end. I like to think anyway that we usually can bring something back. to where we kind of started and tie it all together. But yeah, you just never know what you're gonna get sometimes. But it's 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 trusting, it's just allowing, it's just going with it.
Mhm.
'Cause like you said, there are different gifts out there, um, and a lot of it is just like becoming aware of them. I mean, that's really the big first step is just aware, realizing what's out there. It may be that you have a very nice voice that is mesmerizing and that people feel at ease. It could be that you come up with podcast topics, when you sit there in silence. I mean, there are different things out there that it could be, but it's just the awareness of them, the appreciation for the gifts that you do have. Because, like you said, there's nothing that's better than others. Would it be fun to, be able to talk to dead people? Maybe. I mean, it sounds like it could be kind of fun, you know, but like you said, there's a purpose for the gifts that we have. Um, and it's not that there's things better than others. There's no that they're worse than others. They just are with their purpose.
Yeah. And sometimes it comes, we're laughing because what Brad was just describing there is, peel the curtain back. That's what happens. It's like Brad gets the inspiration on what we're supposed to talk about, and I just talk. I don't know what
You
I'm
allow
doing.
your you allow the voice to go
I just
and
talk.
heal and yeah.
Yeah. But what's interesting is, sometimes it takes us a while to get the message. And so I'll tell you one thing, before I started podcasting and doing a lot more videos, probably 5 or 6 years ago, is when it really kind of started. And I was a speaker. I've been a speaker. I've done webinars and things like that professionally. Pretty much my whole career, I've been speaking at conferences and doing stuff. But what was interesting is about 5 or 6 years ago, I was thinking about, maybe doing a podcast or some things like that. And literally, like three independent people, I mean, three random people that didn't know each other in three different specific situations said to me, "Wow, you have a great voice. Have you been on a radio? Are you a radio host or something?" And I'm like, "Well, this is right." The first time somebody said that to me, I'm like, "This is odd."
Right. This is weird. Yeah.
And the second time it's like, "Yeah, this is still kind of weird." And the third time it's like, "When are you going to listen, buddy?"
Right.
You know? And so I think again, it's just my experience on what I'm learning going through, because I know when I listen to my voice, it's not the same as what I'm hearing. And so a lot of people, when they
Hmm.
hear their voice on recording, they're like, "Oh, I don't like that. Doesn't sound right."
Hmm.
Um, but you just have to go with it and just try to lean into it. Like I said, I don't even know what I'm saying most of the time. Honestly, I will get done recording a video. I don't even know what I said, 90% of it. I just talk and something comes through. And Brad is silent and things come through to him, right? And that having both of us being able to do that, that's what helps make this work. Because without Brad getting the inspiration, I wouldn't know what to open my mouth and start talking about.
And obviously, Jason has a lot more to talk about these things than I do. So,
No, 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 I wouldn't say that, Brad. I wouldn't say that. It's just I've maybe spent a little bit longer contemplating and trying to connect a lot of the experiences in my life back to something spiritual and go, holy shit, okay. Well, now that makes sense,
hmm
right? But it's not, yeah, you have just as much going on.
and then sometimes it's fun just to have those moments where you're just kind of all of a sudden, like the connection is made, the light bulb is on. All of a sudden, you're like, hmm,
Yeah. Yeah, one of the
okay.
sayings that my partner and I have came up with is if you've ever seen Ted Lasso
Hmm.
show, the Roy Kent character. He's famous for going fuck, right?
Yep.
And so we've
Pretty
kind of
much like
come
that.
up
Yeah.
with like fuck. It's like throughout life, that's kind of what it is, right? It's just like you're trying to and get silent, and then you'll have these epiphanies. You get hit with the two before, and then it's like Roy Kent,
Hmm.
like, oh, now I get it, or oh, I don't really want to have to do that, but I know that that's what I'm supposed to do, right?
Right.
It's just bouncing back and forth, and that's what life is, and that's why, again, we've talked about it. It's not just sitting on the mat. The mat is the
Hmm.
part of it, but you got to have those fuck moments too, right? Um, because
It
you got
makes
to
the
be,
mat time worth it.
yeah, because you got to be doing something with it, right? You can't just sit there the whole time without doing anything. So, yeah. All
Well,
right.
yeah, I think we've hit this one for today.
Yeah. And so with that, I think one of the big lessons is start trusting intuition that's coming through.
Hmm.
Realize that you're probably receiving a lot more than you give yourself credit for. That we can be there for other people can be there for us, and just start to know yourself better. However, that comes, if it's names, like that's one of the ways that I've come to know myself better. But whatever it is, just try to take little steps each day and each week to know yourself better and remember who you really are, because that's a big part of this spiritual path.
Yep.
So, with that, have a great week, and we will see you all on the next episode. Many blessings to you and all of those that you love.
See you guys then.
See you.